Hello and welcome to the Microsoft Mega Byte podcast for July 2nd, 2020. Hey, it's been a minute since we last spoke. Well, today it's definitely our longest episode to date, but if you are interested in the topic of training, message delivery, connecting with your audience, whether small or large, and of course, whether in person or virtually, then this conversation should have the goods for you. I sit down with a good friend from across the Atlantic, Chris Smith, who is a fellow master trainer, but with a vastly different set of responsibilities from my own. We talk about what it means to be an excellent communicator, as well as how to get the most out of your virtual audience engagements. So, hey, let's dive right in now and hear from Chris Smith. Chris Smith, the international, intergalactic, interplanetary phenomenon that is Chris Smith. Now, where are you, Chris, and what time is it?
Yo, what's happening, Brian? So, what an introduction for a Monday. I am not in the US. I reside on a very small island called the UK, and it's 5
Never heard of it.
Never heard of it? Yeah, no, we're up and coming. We're up and coming. We're trying to make moves in the world. Hopefully, we'll get some recognition soon. But it's 5 p.m. here, and I've got to say, it is a beautiful day here on our island. It's about mid-20s, which actually in your metrics is I think around about mid-70s, which for us is great. We have blue skies. Can see and feel the sun. It's all good.
Yeah, well, listen, as an American, I detest, your bragging, because that's just not part of my DNA. The boasting that you're doing right now is just so offensive to me culturally. No, that's great. Thank you so much for joining our pokey little podcast. And I would like to start right off the bat with a sincere question, because I might want to steal the answer because it's something I struggle with. I just want to ask you right now. I meet you. Let's say we're at a dinner party. We're hanging out. We're locking eyes because we both have delicious eyes. I mean, let's face facts. And so I walk over to you and I say, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" What do you say to me?
That's an interesting question.
I knew it.
It's interesting because, one, I'm not sure how to answer it, or one, when I do answer it, I think people still don't understand it. And it's interesting because when my children, and I call them children, I mean, I have a daughter who's 22, I have a son who is soon to become 18. When they're asked what I do, they have no idea whatsoever. Yeah. So let me come up with a clever answer. Let's say I'm a people engineer, or an engineer of human skill. Let's say that, which just warrants more and more questions.
Yes. So you focus. So when you describe what you do, you focus more on the, not HR, because I also struggle with this answer as well. I mean, yes, it's marketing. Yes, at the end of the day, it's sales. It's influencing purchasing and all that. But when it comes to the practical day-to-day life of what you're focused on, what you're concerned with, I imagine a lot of it's human psychology. A lot of it is leadership. A lot of it is coaching, probably a vast majority of it, message delivery. So when you say, engineering and humanity and all those things tied together, what are the concerns like, or what are the triumphs like in a typical, let's say, week in a life of Chris Smith? And also, what is your, formal title?
Cool. Let's start off with that, because the title kind of leads on to really what I do week in, week out. So my title for Microsoft is Global Master Trainer, which sounds fantastic. It's a title I'm particularly fond of, even though I'm not particularly fond of titles. But Global Master Trainer for Microsoft, and I suppose a week for me is a lot of the time is spent coaching. So I spend a lot, and I mean a lot of the time on calls, mostly web calls with our master trainer community all around the globe, really to understand what do they need from me in order to do their jobs to the best of their ability. Sometimes that involves skill. Sometimes that demands some coaching from my side. Or, sometimes it's just about understanding, well, what are the challenges that they are currently facing in their market? What are the insights that they have, which are really important for us to know in the worldwide team. If we fully understand the complexities of a market, then we can tailor the response or the relationship that we have with them. And really, it's about understanding what are the gaps out there in terms of behavior. Some people like to call it soft skills. I'm not a fan of soft skills or that term. There's nothing soft about negotiation or influencing or establishing rapport, communication. I like to call them essential skills. So working with our trainers around the world to understand, well, what are those skills gaps out there and how can I work with those trainers to ultimately build solutions that would accommodate those gaps. Lots of PowerPoint, lots of activity building, gamification, all that good stuff.
Well, that dovetails into the conversation of where we are right now, because yes, you and I have quite similar roles, and it's nice to talk to someone who has spent several years trying to quantify it and make sense of it as well, because it is difficult. Yet, and I will say, sometimes I go through, I guess, what's called imposter syndrome, where I think, well, I don't think I'm that important. I don't think if you removed me from this machine, I don't think anyone would notice. And then there are other weeks where the full megalomania kicks in, and I think there would be no Surface without me. So it's such a funny disparity of what this role is, because yes, soft skills are not quite all encompassing for what this is.
Yeah, no, and man, brother, I'm with you on the in imposter syndrome there. Absolutely. I'm sitting here on this little island and, wondering how I can influence people or situations, right across the globe with hopefully, some positive impact. So
people listening are generally those who influence sales at some level across different countries, primarily North America. But this award-winning podcast is growing leaps and bounds. Logarithmic explosion of our listenership. I assume that's what they tell me.
I'm a big fan of the show, man. I'm a big fan of the show.
As you consider that audience, and who you know very well, perhaps better than anyone we've had on the show so far, can you encapsulate how the state of the sales influencer, brand rep, whatever retail partner they're from, how has their lives changed? Assuming they're slowly entering back into store, as globally that's sort of happening slowly but surely. What's changed from your perspective and your relationship with them, and the kind of coaching that you've been needing to deliver during these incredibly changing times?
Well, I think actually that's where my job has come quite easy. We're all aware of, how crazy the world has been over the past, 4+ months. It has forced everybody to adjust and pivot and try and find new ways of doing their jobs. And for us, it's about finding new ways to still reach those audiences and still, give them value. Why I say it's been pretty easy for me is that I am absolutely blessed that we work with a global team of professionals that, for the majority, have been working on a digital transformation in their own markets in terms of their tactics and how they maintain connection with audiences. They've been doing that for some time. So I think the modern ways that we do our jobs now are, of course, video calls. We've really been maximizing the use of our Teams platform. And I think everybody is becoming a lot more comfortable now at being on camera. Whereas I don't think they necessarily were 6 months ago. It was quite rare if people were switching on their cams, but it seems quite rare now if people choose not to do that. Another way, and a more common way that wasn't so common maybe 12 or 18 months ago is live streaming. And it seems that, the majority of the markets out there are running, weekly. Some markets out there I know have been running daily live streams. We've already digitally transformed, I think, as a community, and there are still some markets that maybe were late to come to that transformation. And what I love about our global community is we have a lot of experts around there, when it comes to social posting or delivering live streams. And so it's identifying who those experts are, who those gurus are in the community, and leveraging them to help markets outside of their own market, maybe markets that are in a completely different region, in another continent of the world, leveraging them to enable those other trainers in those markets to accelerate their own digital transformation.
As I listen to you speak, I really want to put you on the spot because I think there's a lot of hidden treasure that our audience uniquely might be able to derive from you. And so when you say the new ways, whether it's social posts or, talk about social posts. I mean, that's been a big focus the previous months for obvious reasons. Some social posts are better than others. And I'm curious, what's your gut tell you about what makes an engaging social post? I mean, we struggle with this so much, but what do we do? How do we incentivize engagement? How do we make it so that they watch the freaking video that we spend so much time working on about, whether it's Microsoft 365 or the new Windows 10 features or just promotional materials? We want to make something on whether it's, Facebook or otherwise that is engaging for them. And we know some posts get traction and others don't. And there are myriad reasons why and why not. But you have a global perspective that I don't have. And I'm curious, have you noticed any common traits or any common characteristics between social or otherwise remote engagement that works versus when it doesn't?
Another good question. And I wish I had the special sauce or the secret ingredients.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting with that question is, whilst I've been a trainer or I've been in the learning and development industry for 27 years, I'm still learning. And I think one of the best learnings for me over the past 12 months is I traditionally have always been a fan of face-to-face learning. I am an old dog, but I am also willing to learn new tricks. So when it comes to, what makes a great social post and how do you ignite the recipient or the learner's attention to want to engage in your content, I don't think it's always clear, but it's how you try and grab somebody's attention exactly the same way as you would if you were physically with that person. We know that the internet and social platforms, it is a battle for the eyeballs. So, I'm forever just strolling through content on Facebook or Instagram, but how do you grab someone's attention to want to make them engage with you?
Would you say that that's a good rule of thumb? If there is a rule of thumb that's easy to apply, would you say that you've seen more success by those who treat the post as though they are having that direct conversation with the recipient versus the newsflash, headline, wow? Do you tend to prefer the whole, hey, you, I know this is what your struggle is or what you're dealing with right now in store, and here's what we found that works, blah, 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 blah. I mean, if you could describe the tonal difference, is that kind of on the money?
I think it is on the money. I think that's a great way of explaining it. I think also starting out with a question, because straight away you're inviting the listener to engage with you. I'm not a big fan of being told what I should know, what I should learn, or what I should do, but I'm open to have a discussion and debate things if there is a need to change things. So when I think about the social post that I like to engage with, it's usually when somebody has an opinion or is inviting others' opinions. So, those are the kind of posts that I'm particularly fond of, or the type of post that I would choose to engage with. So that's a personal preference. With Microsoft, we have social and brand guidelines that we need to follow. Whether you're training in the store environment or you're training in, let's say, the traditional classroom event, it is your personality, it is your character that usually enables you to get connection with the learner before you move on to the content. Yeah. So how can you adapt? How can you take some of those learnings, from the physical environment to the more social or remote environments as well?
That's a really great guiding principle as well. Just because it is a social post or you're trying to engage your community online does not mean that you should ignore what you would have done in real life and try your best to transcribe or translate as many of those elements into the social post as possible. That's a good thing to embody.
And that actually took me quite a while to wrap my head around.
Yeah, likewise.
Let's say, 6 months ago, there was always the argument of what's better, physical face-to-face learning or online learning. And actually, both of them have their strengths and both of them have their weaknesses. But I always thought, I've been training, physically face to face for 20, 26 years. It's what I'm most comfortable with. I don't necessarily feel comfortable with online engagement or online training, but actually there's very little differences between the two. Obviously, there's some obvious difference. You don't know how present the recipient is because they're not physically in front of you. But when it comes to communication, when it comes to delivering messages, to have clear objectives, to have calls to action, those things are transferable, whether you're delivering in person or delivering remotely.
You mentioned the importance of the brand guidelines. And I think that's something that when you're in the kind of meetings that you and I are in, which, let's be honest, they aren't always the top echelon of thrilling, but they are about things like guidelines, guidance for posting, guidance for training materials, guidance for social community engagement. They have a very sincere, real purpose. And I think it's important for our audience to realize when they see posts from us or from different official formal platforms and communities, and they're thinking, why don't they just say this? This is the way we talk about it to each other works in store. I think it's so critical to realize that, yes, the way you're discussing it in Los Angeles or Seattle or Dallas, Texas, or this new country called New England land, that might be very different. That is so different to how it would be interpreted in Argentina or in New York or Montana. Mm-hmm. And Microsoft's guidelines takes all that into account. And I will say it's something people like Chris and I deal with day in and day out. In fact, a great anecdote that just happened recently where I submitted a video for a rollout for the worldwide Expert Zone community. The tone that the video I submitted, I thought was great. I think the vast of the United States would understand. It has some dry humor in it that is, to me, quite obvious. But when I sent it up and you sent it for review yourself, the feedback was this might not resonate across the globe as it's intended to. And in fact, it could risk misconceptions. There were some tone issues. And to me, initially you go, oh, come on, get real. And then you watch it again through the eyes of someone who doesn't speak English as their first language. And you realize, ooh, that could be an issue. That kind of self-analysis as we go through whatever social engagement we're making, whatever content we're making, I'm curious how you keep your head in that game. It's one thing for me to keep my eye on the ball in terms of making sure this resonates from New York to LA, but making sure things resonate from Latin America to the Middle East is something I've never had to consider. How do you stay so global, Chris Smith? That's my question.
Wow. How do I stay global? First of all, the social and brand guidelines, they are there for two reasons, really. In my mind, the first one is to protect the brand and to ensure that, no matter where we are in the world, that we are, talking about our devices and services in the same way. They are guidelines, so there is always some room for maneuver. But the guidelines are there to keep us from going too far outside of them. And it's also, the guidelines are there also to protect us as individuals, to ensure that we know where we can do, where we can go, what we can say, and more importantly, sometimes what we can't say as well. Again, trial and error. So I do work with everybody, all of our training community around the globe. And I think for me, it's about, if you really want to ensure that your language and your messaging lands, then keep it simple. Keep your words simple. I I love a joke. I was the joker in school. I've always been the joker. And sometimes I have to rein myself in because ultimately it's not about it's not about people understanding necessarily my personality and the level of my humor, which is off the chain, by the way. The number one objective of everything I do is to ensure that my message is understood. So seek first to understand before being understood. Understand what the world needs, understand that whilst we have a fantastic community of trainers, evangelists that represent our wonderful brand all around the world, it's ensuring that, my language is kept simple, the objectives are clear, there are clear calls to action, that everybody can understand and get on board with. If I'm only talking to one part of the world or, one type of community, then my message won't always land as it should be. So what I'm trying to say is have clear objectives, keep it simple. The balance between the brand and your personality is a difficult one. It's really difficult, and sometimes it might even seem a little bit subjective. But if you're never sure, get people to check it over before you make it public. I think that's another learning from me, because whenever I create something and let's say I'm not 100% sure about it or whether it will land as much as it would do or should do, then I'll generally share it with either some of my worldwide colleagues, or there's been occasion where I'm putting together some content. It could be a social post. It could be that I'm, plotting the scenes for a live stream or a video. And actually, I'll pass over the script to some of my colleagues or master trainers in some of our Asia markets, because, culturally, it is, a region that I probably know and understand the least. So giving them visibility of what I'm planning, what I'm working on, and really getting them to give me feedback to ensure that ultimately the message lands as it is intended.
Yeah. What you're describing there is a good humility story that is one that is universal. Whether you're designing content for a small regional training with 17 RPs or a global TTT, you should be having that trusted, skeptical outside eye that will provide you feedback without emotional investment to let you know if you're going to be on the mark or not. And when you find those people throughout your career, cling to them dearly. Even if they leave and go to different companies, for God's sake, sometimes those eyes and ears who will give you that unabashed, objective feedback, that's insanely valuable to keep those people close by.
100%. I mean, I've got 3 or 4 solid mentors and some of them have been in my life for 20 plus years, that I would regularly bother and say, look, can you put your eyes over this content, be critical. And I know damn sure they'll be very critical, and they have permission to do so. I always talk a lot about blind spots. Everyone is awesome, right? We are awesome, but we're not perfect. We do have blind spots. And the more you invite people to point out some of the blind spots are characteristics of your personality, characteristics of your behavior, that you just might be unaware of. And sometimes they could be negative characteristics. So the more you invite people to point out some of your blind spots, well, if you're brave enough to do so, it's very valuable, because once somebody points out a blind spot to you, you've got 2 choices, right? You could accept it as part of your character, accept it as part of your personality and say, I'm cool with it, I'll just keep it. Or you can say, well, actually, no, I'm not cool with that. And I could actually see where that might impact the work I do or the relationships that I try to build. So I'll do something about it, and I'll consciously work to try and turn that blind spot into, a moment of truth and something of strength in the future.
Yes. And for those of you wanting to double click into that, there's a simple chart that you can at a glance understand, and I have it printed out and put it in my closet because it's worth reflecting on daily. So please Bing Johari window. Just go search for Johari window at home, Johari, and that will give you the roadmap and the entire premise behind what Chris just reviewed about identifying those blind spots to yourself. And it can be genuinely an eye-opening experience.
Yeah, absolutely. A question for you: Do you know why it's called Johari?
No. I guess I assumed it's two names put together.
That's absolutely spot on. It's a model by two psychologists, I think they were, Joseph Luft and Harry Ingham.
There we go.
So Johari.
Hey, you're in the business of providing insights, which, as someone told me once, are observations beyond the obvious. So you did it. Okay, sorry to break in real quick, but when you continue listening, you will hear that something must have happened with our connection, because Chris's microphone and the audio feed has some audio abnormalities coming through, but the content is so good, and we wanted to let you continue hearing the conversation without cutting it. So we're leaving it in. I cleaned it up as best I could, and he's definitely clear enough to be understood. So thanks for understanding, and we'll pick up the conversation now. So I'm sure many people are wondering where you've come from. I mean, I must say my own background is certainly different from many other schools of thought behind how you get a job working in corporate training. I have backgrounds in performance and theater and in technology, and sometimes it's confusing for me to even make sense of it and how I am here. So I'm curious for you, and I'm sure it'd be fascinating for everyone to hear, where did you come from and how did you end up here?
Actually, very similar to what you just said there about the performing arts was definitely my stage door into the crazy world of learning and development. So in my teenage years, I was the lead singer of a band. A band was called Freakophonics, which was a hip hop rock band. Lots and lots of fun touring my little island back in the late 80s, early 90s. We had a big fan base of, I think, of about 22 loyal students who used to follow us around from grungy pubs to the next. But unfortunately, we were never signed to the big time. So, as a front man of a band, you kind of realise that you kind of like that stage. You like the attention. You like being out in front. Also, at the same time, the band wasn't really making much money, so I had to get a job. And the late 80s saw the beginning of what was to become a very large retailer in the UK called the Carphone Warehouse. Initially selling car phones, as in the title, but then became the largest independent mobile phone retailer in the UK. And this was really at the beginning of the mobile phone tech industry in the UK, portable cell, maybe you guys call it in your funny little language. I was selling mobile phones, and these were analog mobile phones, the bricks. Once you sold one, fantastic commissions. They were so expensive, but once you sold them, then you had to manually program them. These were before the days of SIM cards. However, I digress. I started working for the Carphone Warehouse, and I very quickly moved into their training team, inducting new employees into the company, and I absolutely loved it. So much so that I ended up in that job, or being in training for the Carphone Warehouse for 15 years. Eventually being the UK and European training manager for the Carphone Warehouse. Loved the industry, loved the tech business. And after 15 years, I actually left Carphone Warehouse and took on a global job as a global training manager for Nokia. Wonderful company. beautiful people, and spent a lot of time in what I believe is one of the most beautiful countries in the world, and that is Finland, the home of Nokia, or Nokia, as some like to call it. I was with Nokia for a number of years, and then as part of the migration, I moved over from Nokia to Microsoft, and I've been working with Microsoft now for around about 4 to 5 years.
Oh, I did not know that about your background.
Always in the tech industry, which is interesting. I'm not the biggest of techies, which actually makes it really interesting because, I try and keep tech as simple as possible because I am naturally not that nerdy. I think for me, it's important that whenever we're talking about tech, always talk to the lowest common denominator, certainly if you're in a group of people, because I'll put myself in that lowest common denominator sometimes because purely I want to understand the tech. I want to understand it in its basic form so I can then kind of accelerate my learning in tech.
So, if you can connect with others in the darkest, smokiest pub with 22 fans and still have a good night, then you've learned something. You've learned something about your own ability. So I'm sure you hear this as often as I do, that people want to get involved in training. They find that they would be interested and probably confident and competent at it, and they want to know what kind of muscles to start working out, what kind of skills to start honing. And so as a final question to you, how best do you describe your ability to influence minds, be persuasive? What skills do you use to do that? And how would you recommend others hone and calibrate those skills for message delivery?
Great question. I have some rules that I live by. Probably the most important rule that I live by and I've lent upon over the past 20 plus years is this, and that is connection before content. Connection before content. In our daily jobs, whether we're delivering, physical training, remote online training, we go in there, we have a training plan, we have a set of objectives that we need to ensure. But it's connection before content. How can you make a connection with somebody or a group of people? Because it's the old saying in retail, people buy from people. And, it's really important that you try and establish that connection. You also need to understand, well, who is the learner? And whilst I might have, a bunch of objectives that I need to, I need to deliver on, are those objectives aligned to what the learner needs also? So connection before content, it really is, the power of the relationship and how you establish a rapport with somebody that makes them want to stay there and engage with you. Exactly the same as a customer when they go into store. What is it about the retail pro that makes the customer want to engage with them? Is it their enthusiasm? Is it their curiosity about the customer's needs? But demonstrating, a real care for the learner, just like a retail pro would demonstrate care or should demonstrate care for what the customer needs when they walk into the store, which sometimes can be, a little bit daunting from them when they see aisles and aisles and aisles of devices that look very, very similar. So it's about the compassion, the understanding that you have the individual that you're talking to, and to try and put them at ease before you try and take them on a journey of discovery.
I'm not happy with how well polished that was at the end and how good you're making yourself sound and come across. I was hoping for something a little more slanderous, but unfortunately you've come across like an articulate king. And that bothers me.
That surprises me.
Big time. I think that takeaway of compassion and connection before content is something that can be taken away in practical terms as well as theoretical terms. If you're out there listening, think about every stage of whether you're influencing a sale or influencing a knowledge transfer, that connection before content can play a heavy role in what you decide to make your first couple moves and your first couple steps on that process. That is a great guiding post, a guiding light. So thank you very much, Chris. I want them to really land with that and leave with that message. So one more time, I profoundly appreciate the time and the expertise and the clear level of preparation you had with this message and this content for this conversation. So thanks very much indeed.
Absolute pleasure, Brian. As I said, I'm a fan of the show. It's a real privilege to be on here.
Yeah, well, checks in the mail. Thank you, buddy. This has been the Microsoft Mega Byte podcast, a training tool for Microsoft field team members and sales professionals across the country, produced by Microsoft employees.